Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
However, there have been a certain percentage of this volume of reports that have been made by credible observers of relatively incredible things.
2, 1, 0, all engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11. Tower clear.
We're having luck, but other sightings apparently were taken more seriously.
And one in particular, an incident called the Rendlesham Forest Incident, also known as Britain's Roswell. This was in 1980, shortly after Christmas, when a few American airmen who were stationed in the UK reported seeing a UFO.
A huge, solid, diamond-shaped object they described as 100 foot long, hovering silently in the sky above them.
There is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone, whatever that means.
American public and global public finally understands UFOs are real. This is a technology that is so far beyond anything that we have.
Reportedly appear to exhibit unusual flight characteristics, appear to demonstrate advanced technology.
Arrow is the culmination of decades of DoD, intelligence community, and congressionally directed efforts to successfully resolve UAP encountered first and foremost by U.S. military.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Disclosure Team. I'm your host, Vinny Adams. The following is an interview with Dr. Dr Stubbings. Daniel is a clinical psychologist at Cardiff Metropolitan University. In this interview, we discuss Daniel's paper that was published in the Journal of Scientific Exploration. If you enjoy this content, please just take a second to hit that subscribe button, like the video, and if you want, comment down below and share with your friends. It all really helps, and it's so much appreciated. I hope you enjoy this interview with Dr. Dr Stubbings. So Daniel, before we get into the paper that you recently had published in the Journal of Scientific Exploration, if you could just give me a bit of background on your qualifications and things like that.
Yeah, so I'm a clinical psychologist. I grew up in Australia, and so I started my training, did my bachelor's degree, then my honours degree, which the UK equivalent is like a master's degree. It's like another year after your bachelor's. Then I began my master's training, which is the training to become clinical psychologist in Oz. Then I got a scholarship to do my PhD. So I did my PhD, which was a randomized control trial comparing face-to-face to video conference, because back in those days it was kind of, can we even do therapy via video conference? And now it's like so ubiquitous. And then after almost a decade of studying, and I moved to the UK, and I began working in a company that run a bunch of secure hospitals. And so in total, I did 7 years in different secure hospitals across low secure, locked rehab, visited a few medium secures. 2016, I began working at Cardiff Metropolitan University and worked my way up from lecturer, senior lecturer, and principal lecturer. Since 2020, I've been working 2 days a week in cancer and palliative care in the National Health Service. That gets a whole array of sort of presentations. And that's basically in a nutshell my clinical sort of background.
So, Daniel, what brought you to the UFO UAP subject?
So it would have been about 2020. I had a friend who should not be named, who's a very good friend of mine, who basically we were talking about other stuff, and he sort of says, have you ever seen the Bob Lazar documentary by Corbell? And I'm like, well, no. And at that point in my career, I'd pretty much seen what I felt like was almost every single kind of clinical presentation. I've worked with psychopath, self-harm, severe trauma, kind of most things I've seen clinically from a mental health perspective. And I was, at that point in my life, hardcore atheist, hardcore existential psychotherapy was a large chunk of influenced my sort of practice. And so from my point of view and all my training and things I'd read, it's that there is no real such thing as a soul or a consciousness, and seeing UFOs, there is so many prosaic explanations as to why it could be anything other than a UFO. Everything from well-intentioned people who misperceive things, misunderstand things. You can hallucinate without having schizophrenia. There's heaps and heaps of reasons why there are prosaic explanations for all this. So I just never really paid any thought. And then, so my mates sort of said, have you seen Bob Lazar? And I was like, well, fine. I watched the documentary. So I watched it, and I was like, it's interesting. He's clearly not psychotic. So he's not somebody who's hallucinating. He doesn't appear to be doing it for money. It's not like he's doing endless amounts of book tours and trying to sort of, he's kind of often been hanging in the shadows. There seems to be some stuff that corroborates some of his account, some of it not. And what I'm not trying to go into a deep dive on Bob Lazar, because people have done that to death sort of well before me. The point being is that it sparked my interest a little bit. And then I thought, well, what are the conditions for which somebody really does perceive and understand something that is potentially false, and where's the extent of that, kind of from a clinical point of view? I mean, I work with people who got, like, say, Munchausen's by proxy, and they harm their own children for attention. Like, I've kind of sort of seen it all. So it did intrigue me. And then once you start down the rabbit hole of this sort of topic, and you discover Lou Elizondo, and you discover Christopher Mellon, and it starts opening up the doors that there's some very, very serious allegations that are being made. And when I first met you online a couple of years ago, we had a brief conversation, and from what I recall from that, I was at the stage where I was like, well, maybe this craft thing's new because maybe they came here in 2004, and everything else before that might be not true, and we're starting to see them here now, and isn't that interesting? But surely the abductions, the cattle mutilations, the consciousness, the near-death experiences, blah, 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 all that's surely, like, not true. That's kind of honestly where I was at that sort of point in time. I was watching quite a few of your videos, and you've got a reach for the particular kind of audience, and I think it's sort of, I found your particular audience quite appealing. Well, the audience is the wrong word. I found that your style presentation, I got the personal sense that you aren't somebody who is actively trying to make anything up. Like you're clearly dedicating a large chunk of your time into this topic in a respectful and serious manner. You're not necessarily saying that you know everything or understand everything, but you're doing your best to explore the topic. And I suppose there was something about that I respected, and so that you were also a window into some of your interviews with Lou Elizondo and other people that I was kind of like, this is very, very interesting. But like little by little, it kind of fills up sort of more and more time. And then once I kind of got to the point where I was more convinced that there's something there, that I started blowing lots of cash on lots of books. So like whether it's UFO and Nukes, or if it's kind of John Mack's previous work, or Graham Rendell's work, or Beyond Top Secret. I'm looking up there because there's a chunk of it on my shelf. That isn't really my shelf behind me. It's kind of sort of above me. Ross Coldhart's book, and just kind of on it went. And it's like it kind of gets to a tipping point where you're like, you've read things like Witness to Roswell, and you're like, 600 odd witnesses. And then I started just sneaking into the Swansea UFO network group that they have. And I was going along to presentations where they talked about 60 odd witnesses for Night of the Triangles that happened in Wales with and then they've actually gone out and interviewed all these sort of people. And it's just, it was very, very intriguing. And like I've studied briefly bits on mass psychogenic kind of mass hysteria and sort of how that kind of unfolds. And that's, I mean, look at the I think in Belgium there was a big one around. They started thinking there was a problem with the drinking water, and it kind of caught on like wildfire to the point where they pretty much were shutting down some of the drinking plants. And so mass hysteria like is a thing. I mean, one of the most famous ones was the dancing craze, where people literally danced to death. I think it was in the Middle Ages, and basically had developed this belief that you could catch this dancing curse and you couldn't stop dancing, and people died out in the forest because they were just dancing for days and days and without any food or water, and eventually kind of sort of collapsed. So humans are capable of mass hysteria. That's kind of throughout the ages has sort of been a thing. But it's like, the more I listened and read accounts after accounts after accounts, I was just like, this doesn't really sound like hysteria. It doesn't feel like illness. Some people feel like it's not completely truthful. And I won't point too many fingers about names, but there's a few people in the field of ufology, however you want to define that I just get a gut feeling that it just doesn't feel right. There's something icky. There's something strange about it that's not. It doesn't seem as authentic as it could have should be. And I've listened to many people's most vulnerable, authentic moments about their lives, because I'm in confidential sessions with people, and you just get a bit of a sense. Now, there's caveats to my skills. I mean, I've worked with some psychopaths who I would buy volcano insurance from in the middle of an ocean because they're so convincing. Like, so some people are amazing liars that are really difficult to catch out. But for the most part, why would you, out of all the things you could do for virtue signaling and aggrandizing yourself, you wouldn't pick this topic? There's too much stigma and too much flack you're going to get from it. So it's almost like I came across person after person who not only seemed genuine, they seemed like they were trying to be responsible within their limits, and it just became more and more intriguing. And then I suppose things really started to kick off with, we've had 3 Pentagon reports. Let's ignore the Arrow one because, let's face it, it's has holes, as Christopher Mellon has expertly pointed out in the debrief. Watching Lou Elizondo's sort of documentaries that with what was that one he did with Tom DeLonge? Not Unhidden, Unidentified. That's it. So Unidentified, and he kind of like, and then the congressional hearings, particularly the one with David Grush. It's sort of, I mean, looking at the UAP Disclosure Act of 2023. I mean, Carl Nell didn't partly write that for fun or to embarrass himself, along with Chuck Schumer. So it just becomes more and more credible the more I've kind of sort of looked into it. And through some of the context of the people that I've met, I've had off the record discussions with some people who seem to confirm it for no other kind of public reason other than they're trying to be open with me. So I'm hooked.
That's fantastic. Thank you. So let's talk about this paper that's been published, and if we could just start right back, when you first got the initial idea and kind of the goal that you kind of felt was needed.
So once I considered that there is something to look at here with this topic, I kind of then was like, well, how can I help? What can I do as a psychologist with the gazillion amount of things that I have on? How can I help with the skills that I kind of have? Now, initially I thought, well, wouldn't it be nice to do what John Matt did and just start interviewing a bunch of people who are abductees and experiences and yada, yada, yada. But his is a very good example of a cautionary tale. He goes out, does these things, and he basically gets pulled over the coals by his university and the powers that be in that kind of scenario. So I was very mindful to try not to repeat that. So if I'm not going to go out and do private therapy with people and take those risks, what can I do? Now, I've got no money. There's no funding. There's no UAP funding research thing you could apply for. So some of the things that I have on my time is I usually supervise about 5 undergraduate third-year psychology thesis projects, and I usually oversee about 5 to 7 master's thesis projects in forensic psychology or health psychology, and PhD students and other stuff. But what the free labor or possibilities I thought is mostly in those thesis students. So it's stuff I have to do anyway. Is there a way I can do those things that I'm required to do as part of my job, but somehow get my toe into this topic? So that's where the initial kind of overlap with. So again, when you think okay, if I'm exposing students to research, well, there's the risk of the student to the population that you're testing, and it's sort of how ethical is it for me to put students in those sort of positions? Then you've got to sort of think about the reputation of the university in terms of the risk to the university about whatever topic, because this topic comes with a lot of stigma. So it's like I would feel very hesitant and understandably cautious kind of picking anything like too controversial, because it's just, what's the point? You're trying to dip your toe in this water and build up an area. So where can I start? So where all scientists should start is they look at what's been done before them, what's in the published literature. Now, that's the evidence-based sort of scientific literature. Now, books are literature, and books can have evidence in them, but it's not the same as something that's been through a peer-reviewed sort of process. So, because usually what you do is you find something that's been through a peer-reviewed process that's been done before, and science, in my view, rarely happens through making massive discoveries. It's through incremental bits where you take a little bit and you think, well, we did a study in Wales, so let's do a study in England. Let's now do a study in Africa. Let's do a study here. And you just repeat it again and again and again and look at the differences. Or you take one study and you think, well, let's change one little bit of that. And then let's change another little bit. And so it's incremental growing of knowledge, right? And that's kind of how it should work. Sometimes you come across miracles and you find things that cure cancer or whatever. But for the most part, that's not really how science works. Because it needs to be scaffolded on a body of knowledge to kind of get anywhere. So one of the things I found that was done before me, and I'm just kind of getting it off my desk here, was a paper. This was back in 2022. So this paper by, I don't know how to pronounce it properly, Viren Swamy in 2010. Oh, it was? Okay. Yeah, I thought it was 2016. I was wrong, 2010. So this is before like the Lou Elizondo stuff and all that had kind of come, the New York Times article and stuff. So 2010, in the Journal of Applied Cognitive Psychology, volume 25, was basically a paper where they looked at personality variables. So that's the big five. Now, I think I screwed this up the other day, but neuroticism, extroversion, openness, conscientiousness, and agreeableness. So they are the five personality temperaments that, irrespective of culture around the world, we fall into those categories, and you can measure people on those things. Now, in this paper, they also looked into another variable like schizotypy, which is another personality variable, sort of the odd, eccentric, kind of unusual kind of cognitive sort of style. And basically what they found, they were looking at people who believe in extraterrestrials. So one, that's not the same as non-human intelligence or UAP, but that was before then. Now what this sort of found was that those who believe in extraterrestrial life are more likely to be high on openness. So they're the kind of people who are just very open as a personality trait. Higher on schizotypy, so they're likely to be a little bit more discombobulated, a little bit more random, a little bit all over the place. Higher on paranormal beliefs, and education. The less educated, the more likely you are to believe in extraterrestrials. Now, okay, fine. That's a paper. It's published data. Okay, there's problems with it, but every study has problems with it. But the meta problem that I found with this wasn't so much what they did or how they did, because you can always sort of change that. I think they had like 400 odd participants, so it's a pretty big study. The analysis was fine. The issue is more that it goes along with this narrative that those that believe in UAPs, UFOs, are highly open weirdos with tinfoil hats. It just fits the stereotype. Now, so I took a step back and thought, okay, well, at least this is published. Now, about 33% of all psychology studies get replicated. That's a massive problem for the field, because when they actually replicate it, they find a large chunk of those don't actually find the same results. So that's a big scientific problem. So large chunks of what we know are actually not very good information. It might be one paper, but you need multiple papers of the same thing and repetition for good evidence. But that issue aside, I thought, well, moving this along, I mean, is a belief in UFOs the same as an experience? Probably not. So if you believe the Earth is flat, I mean, it's not the same as standing outside the Earth and having a look at it. Or you can believe in unicorns, but find me a list of people who have seen unicorns and see if there's a difference. So basically, I sort of thought, well, okay, we know that highly open, eccentric people are more likely to believe in alternative things. Well, that's obvious because they're strange alternative people. They're going to have a very wide filter for what they take in. They probably believe in all kinds of strange things. Fair enough. So that wasn't particularly exciting, but it's like, okay, well, how can I improve that? So in 2022, I thought, okay, well, what can I think up that is a variation on that? Let's just primarily change it to those that have alleged that they've seen a UAP or UFO. Okay? So really, all I was doing was copying someone else's work, using some free measures because I had no money to use the measures that they used. So some free measures that were kind of okay. So I'm copying someone else's work and making the change of let's look at sighting versus belief and then see what we find. So all science should be a degree of copying someone else's work. You just acknowledge it and sort of take it from there. So that's where the idea came from. Then I got allocated my students for that year. And so then I found one that agreed to do the topic with me. That's a lot quite risky for poor students to sort of take on because they want to do well in their thesis and they usually want to do something that they find particularly interesting. So me suggesting, well, how about we look at this? For many, it's like the equivalent to say, well, let's look at unicorns. They're probably thinking, oh my God, what's the supervisor going to make me do now? And I can't tell him that I don't want to do that because, well, he might not give me good marks. It's like, well, that's not actually how it works. Yeah. But either way, it's a bit of a rapport process that. So the second author was the student who agreed to do the project. And they get a bit of a good deal because it's kind of like a lot of student papers, you supervise them, which is you have superior vision, which means you've kind of done it before and you give them an overview and onto it. But with these topics, I'm particularly motivated because I want to publish it. So I won't be able to help myself but re-looking at the data rather than just chucking it in the file drawer and going, okay, on to the next. So yeah, and the other goal was to sort of warm up the university, just to say, look, someone else has published this stuff. I'm just doing it with a variation. So if you've got any issues that I'm looking into this topic, one, others have done it before me and they've successfully published, and you either publish or peril. So, and if I can publish this, then hopefully I can publish other things. Right? So, yeah. So then it led to, okay, well, how are we going to design it? And so basically it was copying the other study, use the big five, measure schizotypy, but I thought it might also be worthwhile to allow people to have a little bit of an account of what they've seen, so just they can give a bit of a description. And I remember seeing from one of Richard Dolan's on his YouTube account, he said that there used to be Leonard. Is it Leonard Stringfield? Is that his name? Yeah. And so he'd do these conferences and say, well, how many of you have seen a UFO? And he's doing it at a conference. Then most of them stick up their hand. And then they say, well, how many of you reported it? And most of them will put their hands down. And so Richard Dolan came up with some numbers on what he thought was like a percentage. And I thought, oh, that's a good idea. Again, I'm quite happy to steal from other people. I think I referenced his work in there. So it was more he gave me the idea to think about, okay, well, what is the actual number? Because I don't know of anyone who's got a number. Like, how many people report their sightings who have had a sighting? Because we know how many people report to MUFON, but how much of that is a representation of the wider actual sighting? So what inference can you make about that kind of overlap? So I thought, that's a small question. Stick that in. Have you reported it? And then also, why didn't you report it as well? Just so I can kind of get some information about that. And so in some ways, I was hedging my bets that if I found nothing of use in the personality data, then maybe I can kind of go with some of this stuff. So, yeah. And so then basically we applied for ethics. That always gets knocked back, make some amendments. It got through, and then once we had ethics through, we could make it on Qualtrics, release it on Twitter. I was very appreciative of some people who shared it. So there's quite a few bigger accounts than mine, because at the time I didn't have many followers. People sort of shared it, and then I had quite a number of people fill it out. So we had 206 participants, and the strange thing is 103 of them had sightings out of the 206. I mean, even the peer reviewers went, that's a bit weird, having like a split down the middle number. That's what the data was. That's just what it is. And so then what happens is that the student had to complete their work. Now, I couldn't publish any of the work until the students done their marking and stuff like that. So so their project's done. So I had to kind of get that done. And then when that was done, so all the data was collected. I think it would have been about March, April time last year. And then I, over the summer, could start writing up because the student was all done and marked then. And so I was writing up, and I was also in email correspondence with the third author. And so that back and forth, I had my analysis of the data. Now, I've spent most of my career doing clinical work and some of that doing academic work. But there's many psychologists out there who are just a lot better at the stats than me. So I was very kind of pleased to liaise with Alexander Wong from California State University in the helping push my analysis to the next level, really, from a statistical point of view. So he had knowledge of the latent profile analysis in a better depth than I did. So unlike the Swami paper where they just looked at what they call regression, which is basically an extension of correlation, and correlation is looking at sort of two variables and the statistical relationship between those. With the latent profile analysis, it can sort of see, well, what combination of variables show different groups within the pattern. And so that was, I guess, something else that we managed to sort of bring to the table that I can kind of talk through. So yeah, over the summer, I wrote it up, and then I think I submitted it for first review it must have been about September time last year. And then it took several months for them to go over the review process. And then once you get the feedback from the reviewers, then you make all the amendments, and that took me good month or so. And then once those amendments were made, I sent it back, and then the time between acceptance, which it was the 22nd of December, but then it's not published till the 31st of March. So it's kind of like, so if you think about, it probably would have been in March 2020 that 2022 that I originally thought, yeah, I want to do this. This is possible. So you're talking 2 years. 2 years from I'd like to do this simple project to when it actually gets published. So hence why even books, like some really good books on this topic and other topics, like the books are a culmination of published research. And it's like published research is 1 to 2 years behind the actual data itself, and books therefore become 5 to 10 years behind all the published data. So conferences are sometimes where to get the most up-to-date information. But the point being that, even today's current papers are still 1 to 2 years, or if not longer, old information kind of coming out. Now, it's fair enough to sort of say, well, I'll leave it there. That's the story of how that kind of went. So
No, that's great. That's really fascinating. I appreciate that. So, after kind of putting all the data together and everything, did anything surprise you or really stand out that you didn't expect? I mean, other than the percentage of people who had sightings, etc. But was there anything else that kind of gave you food for thought?
It was actually more so that, really. It was that 14% of people report their sightings. So that was like great. I think that's the first number I've come across where I've got data that's the ballpark, right? So that feels nice to do something sort of good. I wasn't surprised too much about the profiles of the personalities because I'd interacted with so many people that I kind of knew it wasn't the really eccentric, anxious people doing a lot of this stuff. So it was more confirming in a nice way that the data was sort of showing that, yes, that people who are high in conscientiousness, openness, tend to report sightings or to admit to having had a sighting compared to those that are either average on variables or really, say, neurotic, say, anxious or emotional, and the emotional volatility and high in schizotypy. It's almost like, I suppose that was a little bit surprising. I can't really think of the right word right now, other than confirming, but it was reassuring. Maybe it was like, yeah, this is a triangulation. This is confirming my experience with actual experiences. That sort of this is marrying up. That like you could argue now this is an extension, not so much of the data, it's what you could argue infer from it, that yes, there is a small cohort of people who are very eccentric, very open, who are into this topic, and there's also a small cohort of people who are very emotionally volatile, very closed-minded, who are won't touch this topic with a barge pole. So like some of those stereotypes of the kind of the tinfoil hat believer and the neurotic, anxious debunker, like they do exist in the patterns of the data, but on average, they are not the average. The average is that most people who see sightings are actually quite high in conscientiousness. Now, that could be a biased effect, that it's those that are highly conscientious, feel like they're doing the right thing, and are very open, could admit to themselves what they have seen, versus somebody who sees it and goes, nope, no, it wasn't there, and just kind of carries on with their life as though nothing ever happened. But yeah.
No, again, I appreciate that. Now, I mean, as someone who obviously studies kind of behaviors, let's say, of people and reactions to events, let's talk about ontological shock and the if we were to get this big disclosure that we are being visited and potentially have been for a long time by a non-human intelligence. I hear it a lot that certain people will say nothing will happen, people will just go to work tomorrow as if nothing's changed. But then other people on the other side are sort of saying there'll be societal breakdown and people will start rioting and go crazy in the streets. How do you see that happening? What would your academic mind kind of look like when thinking about that?
Well, I mean, my first starting point is I think you've got as much chance of predicting how disclosure is going to go as you do the weather in 100 years' time. So I think, could it be bad? Yes. Could it be good? Yes. Could it be a bit of both? Yes. Could there be such utter cultural variation around the world? Yes. I think I said this before elsewhere, that I think Carl Nell's kind of overview of the 7-year disclosure plan, and what Elizondo kind of went over on your channel a few years back, which wasn't quite disclosure plan, it was more an engagement plan. Both great, both reasonable, makes sense. Yeah, I think if you were going to go on the evidence of how to handle this, graded exposure is how you deal with any anxious sort of topic. So graded exposure was bit by bit, where you expose people to stuff. And a plan is better than no plan. However, all that thinking led to a more recent study that I've done that I may or may not publish, or I'll see how well it kind of sort of writes up. But basically, I wanted to test it because, as far as I know, we don't have any data on people's emotional reactions to this topic. I saw one YouTube account, I can't find it for the life of me now, where somebody was asking them about the UAP topic and showing a bunch of stuff, and they were recording people's reactions and discussions. But that's still not quite research. It's not, it's not been ethically approved. You're not measuring anything. So one of the other follow-up studies that I did after this paper was I was involved in a study where we had like a 45-minute briefing of the congressional hearings, the area school documentary, bits from the Jesse Michaels Yes Theory show that he's got, where he interviews David Grush in different kinds of ways, bits from the Phenomenon documentary. So, and I had some little segues in between explaining different stuff. And I thought, if I was going to just dump everything that is fact, and when I do fact like that, I'm saying that they are verifiable things that exist out there. The congressional hearing is real. It happened. The kids at area school were interviewed. So, there's nothing really speculative. The implications are speculative, but it was all stuff that's out there in the public domain that most people just don't get exposed to. I thought, okay, let's test a small group of people and expose them to that and measure their emotions before and afterwards, and do some interviews with them to see how they respond. Because I was going really, really sort of softly, thinking, well, we all talk about this catastrophic disclosure and shock, and this could go really badly. I might show people 45 minutes and they kind of become really disturbed and discombobulated, and I've got to then manage all that. So I thought, okay, we'll just try to do 10 people and see how it goes. And almost uniformly, people were like, well, it's all interesting, but unless it helps like lower the cost of living or shows up in my house, I don't really care that much. And some were more like, I don't care because I don't think it's real, and even if it is real, so what? And then there was others that were like, well, it's very interesting and we should investigate it, but it's so. So from my very, very small preliminary data on a particular kind of cohort in a particular kind of context, it's a little bit like I got the impression that people have been so unimpressed with governmental narratives and dictates from above that even if Joe Biden stood up and spilled all the beans, they'd just be like, "Ah, shut up." Like it's almost like not only do people have to discover it from themselves, it's just maybe not relevant for a lot of people. But then I'd sort of say that knowing that the Earth is round is actually probably not relevant for a lot of people, and it wasn't relevant when they found out either. Like, I mean, who's going to milk the cows in the 16th century or whatever it was when they found out the Earth could be round? I mean, it's sort of people would be like, "Well, I don't care." What was the guy that found it? Was it Galileo that, or was it because?
I could potentially be. I wouldn't like to say either way in
Well,
case I'm
well,
incorrect.
yeah, I should know these things, but I bet you his wife is going, "Oh, shut up." Like, so. However, I think I've said this before as well, that I mean, just because it's not relevant to a lot of people doesn't mean it doesn't have the utmost profound implications for humanity and for those that are conscientious enough, brave enough, and want to take on the responsibility and adventure of a lifetime into what is potentially one of the most earth-shattering, changing topics that you could imagine. So, but I'm sure there's some good person out there who does nothing but study bees, and it's like, no, this is actually the most important topic on the planet. If we don't have bees, everything else kind of collapses. And lots of people don't care. I mean, it's the same with mental health. I've met people who said, look, I don't believe in mental health. Like, just it's an excuse to not be at work. And then I've seen those people fall ill, and they're like, oh wow, God, I'm profoundly depressed. It is actually real, and so it's something about that with all this. So my short answer is, I don't think we can predict how it's actually going to go, and maybe we also should just have to crack on in many ways, because it might be very underwhelming, the impact. But the impact of catastrophic censorship is, I'd say, because we have it in retrospect, might be far easier to manage and quantify how much damage has been done.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned their mental health, and obviously you're working very closely with, well, you're part of the Unhidden team with John Priestland, and you just did a fantastic show a couple of days ago with Matt Ford on the Good Trouble show, which I will urge everybody here to check out, and I'll pop a link in the description. But for anyone that may have not seen that, could you just give us a brief outline of what Unhidden is aiming to do and looking forward, to doing in the future?
So Unhidden is positioning itself as a UK charity for this topic. It has several aims, one of which is, like, let's say you found out you had bowel cancer. You go on and your clinicians tell you some stuff. You go online, you found Bowel Cancer Screening UK. That has some reputable information about it. It's been vetted. It's not trying to alarm anyone. It's trying to help and advocate and raise money to improve bowel cancer. That whole thing needs to potentially occur in the UAP topic. Now, on the one hand, let's assume that UAPs are not real and that they're prosaically explained. Well, maybe those people also don't feel like they have anywhere to go and need some help and need supporting and compassionate care. Let's assume that maybe it is true and there is something there. Then it would be undeniable that something needs to be done to help the people who have seen things and that have probably been heavily stigmatized. I mean, if you go back to maybe the 60s and the equivalent of sexual assault was a little bit taboo, a little bit let's not talk about it, she's probably making it up. Sort of people in authority and power just wouldn't do that to children. And Jimmy Savile, surely, he's a nice guy. He's a real nice guy. Like, so times have changed where we kind of go, yeah, let's stamp that out at all costs because like that's really bad. So there's other areas that have made shifts. And so Unhidden, on the one hand, wants to provide the sort of staging platform to sort of advocate for the well-being of people who are experiencers. Because whether it's deeply ontologically shocking or it's the most earth-shattering positive change in their life, one of the problems is that, good or bad, your exposure to UAP likely opens up the aperture to what you may take in. And so what you take in is potentially could be quite influential or damaging, depending on what's taken in. So you need reputable sources like Bowel Screening UK or whatever to go and sort of not fall down the rabbit holes that lead to harm. Now, another aim in some ways is that we want to try and advocate that the UK government and the various organisations, whether it's medical, sort of psychological, physics, just the different areas, we want to try and advocate that to take this topic seriously, and that there is a gap in services. So I can think of experiences that I've met who they go to the GP. The GP says, I've got a 10-minute consultation. What the hell am I supposed to do with this? I can't really refer it to mental health. And if I do refer it to mental health, they'll probably just either label it as psychosis, paranoia, or an adjustment stress disorder. And either way, it's sort of those services are all full. We've got a massive mental health crisis. I'll try not to speak some of the problems too much publicly about the NHS, but there's other sources that can elucidate the problems in the NHS and care better than I can. So it's kind of like, well, the NHS is full, and they're certainly full for people who present with stuff that the majority don't think exist. So there's no money or funding for this very vulnerable group of people. Now, so the government really are the only ones in a position to help fund part of the NHS or to support private charities, or unless private investors want to sort of help have a tax relief and support charity, that we could then maybe do some of that work. That is potentially on the horizons. We're not in a position to treat experiences at this point in time, but what we can sort of work towards is potentially being able to in a position to train other health professionals about this topic, what to look out for, what to look out for. If we get some significant donations, we can use that to potentially fund some research. What is the extent of the problem in the UK, and what kinds of experiences they do, or that they have. But partly maybe running things like the FREE study again. I can't remember the acronym for that, but it was by Ray Hernandez. So redoing some of that kind of descriptive statistic kind of observational research. So yeah, and I think there's potentially a role for you've got lots of the experiencer groups, community groups like the Swansea UFO group, the Monmouthshire UFO group, the Birmingham UFO group, the Manchester one, and there's probably others on the list. But it's kind of like they are community-led sort of organisations for a little bit of support and a little bit of sharing and exploring this topic with like-minded people who are into the topic. But Unhidden sort of exists outside that and alongside it, where it can kind of sort of advocate for the well-being of people, but also kind of provide things like the white paper that's a call to government to sort of say this is what we need on a wider scale. So it has to be that kind of go-between between the governmental agencies and community groups that sort of link it all together. And from my point of view, so I don't end up in John Mack's position, my hope is that through Unhidden, and the other psychiatrists and GPs and the other medical professionals that we've got there, we can start advocating to open up dialogues with the Healthcare Professionals Council or the Medical Council to outline what is best practice in this area. Because without that, it's hard to have defensible practice. Now, I've worked with all kinds of conditions, and I feel relatively confident to work with any presentation that came through my door. I don't know everything, so there's some people I would refer on, but for the most part, I can roll with it. I feel pretty confident I could roll with an experiencer, no matter how traumatic, whatever it is they've been through, because I can almost guarantee that some of the terrestrial human trauma that I've worked with is probably worse than some of the abductee experiences. I won't go into public detail about some of the levels of trauma, but humans have no limits as to how much harm they can inflict on each other. But the point being, I feel like I could work with it, but by what assessment procedures? What interventions? What theories am I drawing on? Should I be doing hypnosis? Should I not be doing hypnosis? Should I be when there's allegations, say, of a sexual assault, for example, I wouldn't be the first person to interview them. It would be the police, because they have interview protocols for which, if I go in and do therapy too early, I may screw up the accounts, accidentally introduce false information, or kind of there's whole ways that there's the reasons why there's trained people to do the investigations, so they don't contaminate the data when it goes to court. How much do we need those kinds of protocols in place, and to what extent, and who then, once we develop these assessments, who should we train to do them? I mean, most of the UFO groups that I've known in the UK, and I think Swansea is a good example of this, where they go out and do investigations, and so does the Birmingham one, and they're very conscientious, caring, respectful people doing the best they can to collect data and information, which is fabulous. It's better than now. At least people have got some people to kind of go to. But their accounts will almost never meet the muster for a peer-reviewed journal case analysis. Maybe some will, but very, very unlikely. And I'm not saying that the scientific literature is the only way to push things forward. I mean, and I'm certainly not trying to denigrate the role that they do, and they've done some amazing investigations, and I've seen some of those, and some of their accounts go, that's freaking incredible. But if we want it to be taken legitimately, then those avenues have their limitations. And so Unhidden's trying to straddle a lot of those sort of areas by being that kind of, not so much authority is the wrong word, because I think authority is sort of dictating to others. I think it's a trusted, safe place to orientate the field around mental health, care for others, and the support of people for the betterment. And as a bit of a side note, if the more we're successful with that, I mean, I've met some experiencers who claim to have had dialogue with the non-human intelligences. They've told them things back and forth. I reckon that information is probably very important. Like, sort of, what is like, if we were to say, if the amount of people who present to UFO groups and MUFON or whatever is 14%, right? And so we've got 86% of cases that we know nothing about, we've never heard of. Yet, what golden bits of nuggets do some of those have from whatever these things are? I mean, that could have defense implications. That could have humanity implications. I mean, how should we collate these stories, and to what level? So I know I'm going on a little bit of a tangent, but so yeah, Unhidden has sort of multiple aims. It's never really sort of been done before, and I think it holds a unique position alongside like UAP Med and what's Danny Sheehan's one? It's the New Paradigm. Yeah. So we're kind of the only one that's sort of specifically focused on mental health and well-being.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's extremely encouraging to see, John, bring this organization out, and the people that he's got, working within that group is just fantastic. And I mean, also with the paper that you had published, it's very encouraging to have credible academia and science starting to take this subject seriously. So I think, whatever's happening within Congress and the governments around the world, that things are still happening and moving this subject forward for the benefit of humans, for individuals. So I think that's amazing. So Daniel, before we finish, I just wondered if you had any kind of future ideas that can work on the work that's already been done by people before yourself, and then obviously on top of the paper that you've already done.
Well, first of all, I'd say copy my work, collect different samples. Yeah, that's how science works. So do it in different countries, different cultures. Do it with bigger samples. Bigger samples means there's slightly more sophisticated things we can do with the statistics than we can. So crack on with that. I think it needs an army of different researchers around the world investigating this topic. But is looking more into the personality variables of experiences the most interesting and poignant area to go in? I don't really think so. It wasn't really at the time, and it isn't now. It's not that. It's interesting, but it's not super interesting. It's like trying to move the ball forward, but I can see where I think the ball is going, and I'm interested to see how we can work on that, because it's kind of like, the more you look into this topic, almost every single researcher who looks into this topic eventually sees the near-death experiences, the psychedelic experiences, the UFO or UAP experiences, the parapsychology, the paranormal, the remote viewing. Like, it's hard to consider. Are we lumping the unknown boxes together and we say, they're all interlinked? Oh, wow, I feel better now that it's all interlinked and that explains it. And it's all part of the same mystery. When actually they could all be completely separate mysteries. Some of them illusions, some of them mysteries, but not necessarily related to one another. I don't know, but most people seem to eventually go in the realm of the consciousness direction. And it's not just sort of emulating Robert Bigelow. I mean, it's also Donald Huffman's work. I mean, his book, Michelle, The Case Against Reality. I mean, that's nothing to do with UAP, but it's sort of basically sort of saying that consciousness is the heart of space-time. The space-time is part of the Windows software that we see to engage with our world, and it's not the zeros and ones or the hardware of what really true existence is. So I think there's so many philosophical and different directions this research can go, the whole topic can kind of go in, and I think there's more topics to go into than I can certainly do, and so which is why it's more inspiring others across the field to do more. But where I would like to go with it, where I went after this study was looking at the impact of ontological shock, and I found people actually don't seem to find it that shocking. So I might do more replication of that stuff. I had another small project where I was looking at the mental health needs of experiences, just from their point of view, what do they need? And so that was a small study. I didn't manage to get it published. I might extend the size of that study. I've also started some drafts on some assessment tools for experiences, because I'm quite convinced that one day what's going to be needed is something that would stand up in court. Now, the assessment of I winged it and I explored these domains. I'm a clinical psychologist, believe me, I think they're selling the truth. I don't think is really going to cut the mustard. I think the other lawyers will rip that to shreds. So what is needed is something that's called a structured professional judgment that is based on an evidence-based criteria of factors, each of which you have to judge independently. It's kind of the similar way that we assess risk of violence or the risk of sexual offending, or we kind of there's assessment tools out there in those forensic realms that I think we could adapt and use for assessing the validity of a witness's case. And it's those kinds of measures I think will be needed in a court setting. I mean, there's so many. It sounds fanciful at this stage, but it's like, if this topic goes in the direction it's going in, then there's going to be so many other things that come up that are bizarre and interesting. Like, I mean, when's the point at which, I don't know, the husband is a foreign experiencer having all these abduction experiences. The mother wants a divorce because she doesn't want her daughter exposed to that, and the UAP topic is preventing access to custody. So he takes it to court. How do they assess that? Or what about somebody's driving along the road, disclosures happened, everybody knows about it, driving along a road, and a UFO comes out in front of their car, blocks their vision, and they crash into another car. Are they liable? They're not liable? Like, is he telling the truth or not? I mean, how many crashes are going to happen? Go, oh, I was looking at a UFO and it just dematerialized. Give me money, pay me out for insurance. I mean, like, sort of, you're going to have what sounds like the ridiculous now eventually manifest, I think, at some point. And so trying to see where that ball is going, I think I'd like to sort of slowly create a team of people to help make those assessments. And there will be long-term projects for which we'll always need tweaking and improving. Now, some things aren't like a risk of violence assessment, for example. Sometimes they really, really need it, and sometimes they really, really don't. Right? It's sort of if somebody puts a gun to your head, are they at risk of violence? Yeah, probably. They've got a gun to your head. Like, you don't need to do an assessment. The assessment is, I'm in danger. And it's the same with the UAP experience. I mean, sometimes, like, when you think of the Tic Tac event, you've got seen by, 8 pilots. You've seen it on the radar. They've got it on the returns. They catch footage of it. Like, it's gonna. I mean, how much more assessment do you really sort of need that something was there? Yeah, maybe not as much, but in the gazillions, most cases aren't like that. Most cases are quite ambiguous, and Arrow seems to do a good job of making up stuff in other directions. So, where's the defense lawyer against Arrow saying, well, where's your evidence-based assessment? If there is no evidence-based assessment, because no one's created one, by what standards are you saying it's a case or not a case, and in which kind of way? And if you have no standards, how are you replicating anything? How can anybody take the same data you've got and come to the same conclusion? Because if one, not only can nobody get access to the data, two, if they do have access to it, they assess it in a completely different way because nobody agrees on how to assess it. It's just garbage in, garbage out. So my hope is that sort of we can work towards some evidence-based assessments that are used. I was going to say sparingly used, because they will be sparingly, but the problem is it's a bit like we can't predict suicide. So, I mean, they've tried to make measures to predict suicide, and like suicide happens like one successful one every minute. So it's like it's relatively frequent, but we still can't predict when it happens. Because the assessment tools, we just don't have enough data in the pre-measures and all that kind of sort of stuff. And I imagine it'd be quite like this with the UAP topic. I've heard rumors and allegations that some people might be developing ways of identifying those that have had contact with the phenomenon and those that haven't from biological markers. I think Gary Nolan once talked about the impact on the immune system and stuff like that. I don't know. I'd be, it's like, if you can have a blood test to find out if you're telling the truth or not about your UAP exposure, great. But then, let's say you have had one. Let's say you're a psychopath who loves lying, and you have a real encounter one night. It takes you up, they do all the experiments, they put you back down again, you carry on with your life. Then you have your car accident. Oh, it was because of a UAP. Or then you go out and do some other crime. Oh, the UAP took over me, so I can't be liable for stealing what I stole. So again, it's like, even if we find biological markers, we're still going to need psychosocial, psychological assessment tools, and none of that really exists. So, but there's almost a career kind of worth of doing all that. And making assessment tools, I advocate, are needed. I'm happy to chip away at them, but it's still not quite where my passion is, because that's still not quite at the forefront of where I think the most exciting knowledge is. I suppose if I could wave a magic wand and money wasn't an issue, I'd like to position myself to be the psychologist that not only works with the classified experiences that have worked on programs and explore their mental health, because I do lots of reflective practice around staff in palliative units and cancer care and other sort of settings. So, like, what's the impact of their work on them psychologically and how they experience that? And then there's the potential role of being the psychologist or the person who starts profiling, understanding, I don't know if this is the right word, but the psychology of the non-human intelligences. Like, psychology is the study of people, so there's another term for it for when it's the study of non-human intelligence. It's like exo something or other, but it's kind of like, what are they thinking? I mean, how distressed are they when they've seen the allegations of child sex trafficking that exist? I mean, are they up there watching it going, oh man, these monkeys, like, sort of, are they traumatized by watching us? I don't know. And I'm not trying to make fun of the topic or experiences. I'm just sort of saying, just highlighting the almost the absurdity of like the whole topic and the intrigue and the unknown with it all. Yeah? So yeah, ideally I'd like to work with experiences as well, because it's like finding out what they've actually experienced and what they've sort of been through and supporting them. I mean, it's sort of I'd like to do some of that work, because I've done lots of other work, so that would be sort of quite interesting to me. Now, what I could do in the research side of it is still quite small, given all my other commitments that I have on. So it's still, a team effort, as they say, with other academics and some other people. So.
I mean, it's great. And what I will do, I'll make sure that people, I'll pop your Twitter link or X link in the description. People can go and keep up with what you're doing and anything that comes out in the future. And I'll do the same with Unhidden as well. People can go and follow them on X and also go to their website. Well, listen, Daniel, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's a very encouraging conversation, and I wish you all the best in the future.
Thank you, and hopefully, even if it inspires just one other academic, just to look a little deeper. And if they do look a little deeper, there's some growing number of publications out there that sort of are worth a read.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to everybody watching or listening to this, please go down to the description and check out Daniel's paper. It really is great to see academia taking such a bold move into this subject. But that's it for now, guys, and we'll see you on the next one. Take care. Goodbye.